Gamelion. The month Gamelion meant the month of marriage. On the human level, this was because it was the favourite season for weddings. On the divine level, it was also the month of a marriage festival, the sacred marriage of Zeus and Hera, which was celebrated on the 26th of the month as the anniversary. It is hard to tell which of these events came first, whether the prevalence of weddings in Gamelion made it seem the appropriate month to celebrate the marriage of the king and queen of the gods, or the occurrence of the festival at this traditional date induced folk to choose then as an auspicious time for marriage. Behind both aspects may have lain the feeling that now life was about to come with the spring, and marriage and conception could suitably be linked to it. No details of the festival of the Eros Gamos, a sacred wedding, or the Gamelia are preserved. The only other festival in Gamelion was the Lenaea, dedicated to Dionysos. It took place on the 12th, and even about it comparatively little is known. The dictionary of Hesiod on the phrase from Aristophanes, the contest of the Lenaea, explained that the Lenaeon was a place in the city of Athens, with an extensive enclosure, and in it the sanctuary of Dionysos Lenaeos, in which the dramatic contests of the Lenaea were held before the Dionysiac theatre was built. This explanation is generally to be accepted in the sense that there was, within the walls of Athens, an extensive area called the Lenaeon, consecrated to Dionysos. This had been a primitive centre of his cult, perhaps the earliest, and certainly had preceded the introduction of Dionysos Eleftherios in the mid-6th century and the establishment of the city Dionysia. In that sense, dramatic contests had originally been performed there in whatever rudimentary form one is to picture them before the establishment of the theatre of Dionysos. In fact, it would probably be correct to regard the Lenaea as in origin the primitive Dionysia of Athens, corresponding to the country of Dionysia, which we have been discussing. In the classical period, the city Dionysia had taken much of the prestige from the Lenaea, but the latter still had a procession and tragedies and comedies which will have lasted several days, starting from the 12th. The Athenians of Aristophanes were performed there, and the poet reminds his audience that no foreigners are present when he criticises the Athenian war policy. In fact, even the resident aliens, the Matiki, were excluded from this more native and intimate occasion. There is no precise information about the procession, although some ancient commentaries refer to people riding on carts and singing abusive songs, but this feature is so typical of these festivals that it cannot be regarded as giving it any special character. The primitive origin of the festival is indicated by the fact that it was organised by the Basilius, the king, the original authority for religious as well as civil administration. By the 4th century at least, he was joined in organising the procession by the overseers of the Eleusinian mysteries. This may have been originally an administrative development to assist the Basilius, particularly when in the 5th century he was chosen by lot from a lower social class than the aristocracy. But it appears as if the effect may have been to allow the Eleusinian priesthood to get a footing in a festival that which they cannot have had any basic connection. This is illustrated by the solitary statement which we have about the ritual. In the theatrical contests at the Lenaeon, the Diaducus, or torchbearer, holding a torch, says, "Call on the god," and the audience shout, "Son of Semele, Iacchos, giver of wealth." This cannot have been an early piece of ritual. For as we have already seen in discussing the mysteries, Iacchos was a deity invented originally to personify the triumphant shout of the initiates in the procession to Eleusis. He had early become equated with Bacchus, probably because of the resemblance of the two names. In this invocation, the identification is complete. He is addressed as son of Semele, the Theban mother of Dionysos. On the other hand, the address giver of wealth has Eleusinian connections, as it was also an epithet of Demeter. This small bit of liturgy is a good example of the way in which polytheistic Athens, one popular cult, could interpenetrate another. Deubner has tried to conjecture further details of the Lenaea, which our literary sources do not describe. The name itself could be derived from the word for a wine vat, lenos, which would be appropriate to a Dionysiac festival, except that January would not be the month for treading the grapes. Some modern scholars have agreed to derive the name for Lenaea, sometimes applied to the Maenads or infatuated female worshippers of Dionysos. It would be quite appropriate to attribute a festival in the depth of winter to them, as other examples prove. For instance, we read in Plutarch that the Delphic women devoted to Dionysos, called the Theodes, had gone up into Parnassus in winter and been caught in a snow blizzard, and how an expedition had to be sent up to rescue them. The Athenian Guild of Women used to go to Delphi every second year for a combined festival with those of Delphi. So one can accept it that Maenads existed as an organised group at Athens and held their ecstatic dances in winter. In drawings on red figure vases from about 480 BC, instead of the archaic design of Maenads and Satyrs, a new type of more realistic Bacchic dancers appear. These are girls fully clothed in Greek dress, with castanets or the thyrsus dancing together with no male companions, human or satyr. On some vases, the god's image is also shown as a pillar with a human head, draped in male costume. In one particularly beautiful vase in Naples, a priestess with a garland is measuring out cups of wine from a jar which stands on a table before the image. Her careful attention to her work is charmingly contrasted with the two lines of excited dancers who approach the altar from either side. Besides the thyrsus, some of them carry tambourines or a double flute and lit torches, which show that the ceremony is one of those all-night revels associated with Dionysos. These scenes give the clear impression that they're not more or less imaginary like the Maenad and Satyr orgies, but are an artistic transcription of some actual festival. Various other occasions have been suggested, such as the Anthesteria and the Scirophoria, both of which we shall later discuss. But the best identification is that proposed originally by Frickenhaus and adopted by Dubner, that these are scenes from the Linnea. If so, we would have to suppose that part of the festival was a midnight revel of women devoted to Dionysos. By the 5th century, this continued, but was overshadowed by the procession and the plays, so that it found no place in our literary tradition. But some red figure painters saw it in a convenient subject with which to decorate cups and wine jars, which may have been intended for use at the festival.